रशिक, ये जो पेंटिंग है, इस पे जो गधा ऊपर बैठा है वो असल में इंसान है, और ये इंसान को गधा कह रहे हैं, समझे?
नहीं यार, मुझे ऐसा लग रहा है हमेशा ऐसे होता है कि गधा बोझ बनता है, बोझ उठाता है। इस पेंटिंग में गधा खुद बोझ बन चुका
है? तू गलत है।
नहीं, तू गलत है।
तुम गलत हो।
तू गलत है।
आप गलत हो।
तू गलत है।
गलत।
बस किसी ऐसे बंदे से पूछते हैं जिसको इस चीज का ज्ञान हो।
ठीक है, चलो फिर बिठाते हैं बैठक।
बिठाते हैं।
So hello everyone, welcome to our second Baithak, and today we have with us a very special guest. Her name is Professor Sharmistha Saha. She has done her MA in Arts and Aesthetics from JNU, MPhil in Theatre and Performance Studies from JNU as well, and doctorate and postdoctorate in Theatre Wissenschaft from the Dahlem Research School, Berlin. And currently she is a faculty at IIT Bombay, and she runs a theatre company called Qissa Kothi.
Yeah, for the next 1.5 hour, we discussed about lots of inspiring and mind-boggling stuff, ranging from arts and aesthetics to theater performances and how theater originated. And you would not want to miss out on this episode. So yeah, let's start.
So, hello, ma'am. Let's just directly start with the
Hello.
podcast. And the first question that we want to ask you is a very simple question with a very simple answer, I assume, which you would be very comfortable in asking. And that is, what is art?
I think the answer isn't very simple as you think it is. I think simpler questions have very difficult answers, and that's the same thing with the matter of the art. So I was just reading a book. I'm teaching this philosopher called Jacques Rancière in one of these PhD courses that I'm teaching this semester. And I was just about reading this book called Aspirations that he has written, and this is a thesis that he has for a very long time, and he says that in the West, for example, there has been no art until the late 18th century. Okay, but whereas when you talk about art, every time you go into an art history course, or even in India, when we read about the arts, we always think about the arts as something that began from time immemorial. So cave paintings and all these things that one does is all art. But the question is also what we understand as art, to the word itself and how it got associated to that meaning. So if you ask me today, what is art, then I would say that something which is a kind of experience of sorts. It does not reside in the realm of knowledge in the way we know, so not information as such, but something you can feel, something that allows you to think beyond what exists, but more in sensory terms, not in informative terms.
Sure. Also, like, have you used Instagram?
Yeah, I do.
So
use Instagram.
on Instagram, a lot of people caption their photos as aesthetics, put on stories with the word aesthetics on it. But the term aesthetics actually is not very clear to a lot of people. When we were researching about, we saw that it is a very broad field. It's entirely a different study, and it just doesn't fit in the Instagram caption directly as people put it. So what is exactly aesthetics?
So I don't know in what context it's used in Instagram though. I've never really seen it in Instagram in any context. What is the context used? Is it like a layer on the photograph or something?
Yeah, it's like people click photo of cloud and just put aesthetic on it.
Oh, like that.
Yeah, yeah,
No.
yeah.
No, but then, there was this, again, a German philosopher called Immanuel Kant, who goes on to
Yeah.
write a lot about aesthetics. And he proposes that aesthetics is something which is the judgment, which is a kind of judgment, you know.
Mm,
So, for example, if I say that Sarthak's wallpaper is beautiful, okay,
mm,
so this is a certain kind of judgment. So aesthetics is a certain kind of judgment on things that give you pleasure, for example. But there could be also elements which give you pleasure, not in the sense of how they are beautiful, but aesthetics could be also the study of that which is grotesque. For example, horror films. What
yeah.
is there beautiful about horror films?
Hmm.
But aesthetics is also the study of something such as that. So it's essentially a category to for judgment of the arts in some
Okay.
sense.
Mm,
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
So now I would just like to continue to that. Like it is judgment on art, but my
Mm.
question is, why think about art? Like why not just experience it? Why not just consume it and just not think about what goes behind it? matlab, we think about what might be the artist's intention behind making it. What do you make of that art? Why just think about that? Why not just experience that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a question I think that circulates within the popular realm quite a bit. So often we who study the humanities, something in Germany which they call Geistwissenschaft. Now,
mm,
Geistwissenschaft would mean the study of the soul or the sciences of the soul. Wissenschaft means science, and Geist is soul. So, studying the soul. Now, when it comes to people like us who are in the humanities, or we essentially would look at the arts as a matter of study, as an object of study. Now, the question isn't what the purpose of the arts is. Of course, the purpose of arts is not that some people would sit and critique it or think about it. The purpose of art at the end of the day is to create this sensory realm, so to speak, right? This experiential, the sensory realm. But you see, I am in the German sense a Geistwissenschaftlerin, which means a scientist
mm,
who studies the soul. So, as a person who studies the soul, I study the arts. I do not study the arts because the arts need to be studied, but because
mm.
that's what scientists do. For example, water is to be drunk, right?
Yeah.
Why study water? I mean, why study art is as I think futile a question as why study water, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah. So I think I guess my answer was short, but I think it's as
Yeah.
clear as that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So also, we came across a concept called as the intentional fallacy. So it's like, do you know about it? The
Can you
intentional fallacy.
elaborate a little bit?
Yeah. So it was like, there are two spectrums, two broad opinions. One was that, uh, any piece of artwork, for any piece of artwork, the artist's intention is irrelevant. There's one sort of philosophers who think that, and the at the
Hmm.
other end, there are people who think that the artist's intended intention, or the artist's interpretation, is the only possible interpretation of this artwork. And there are people who lie somewhere in between that. So where
Yeah.
do you lie
Yeah.
in that spectrum, and like, what do you think about it?
Um, I think so. There, I guess what you're talking about, intentional fallacy, is something that's also been studied in the realm of studying, let's say, literature or even the
Mm,
arts, where you might have heard this expression, the author is dead. There's somebody called Roland Barthes had spoken about it,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
means that when you read a book, right? When
mm,
you read a book, you do not really read it from how the author might have written. Of course, it's the author's work, but it's from the point of your positioning, which then interprets the work in his or her own way, right? So, in that sense, the author is dead, in the sense that once the author has created a work, it does not have a life which is associated to the author anymore.
Mm,
It is now something that belongs in the realm of people, of everyone who experiences it. That's the
mm,
understanding, I guess, which is the first case
mm,
in the instance that you have given. Now, it is difficult to say whether that is the case, because ultimately the author also brings about experiences um, which we often have not had.
mm,
We have often have not had the occasion to experience things such as that. And sometimes I mean, I do not think I have a straight answer to your question, but I do think that what happens is there is an amalgamation of different kinds of experiences, those from the author and that those from also the reader.
yeah,
So, if, in fact, I would say that if, for example, I'm reading a book today, or maybe, so I was a huge fan as a teenager of the Feluda series, which was Satyajit Ray's,
yeah, yeah,
these books, detective series, and I would love them, but I don't think I would read them the same way I read them when I was a teenager. So
yes,
even during our own lifetimes, the way we read something, it changes significantly. You might have, maybe I liked Titanic a lot when I was a teenager, but
mm,
today when I watch it, might think that what was wrong with me? Why did I even like the film so much? So I
yes,
think the matter is, so if it was only the author who was creating a work, and his or her experience, which was the only thing that was represented through that artwork, then as the person who reads, or as the person who experiences a work, I would not have felt differently, right?
mm,
I feel differently also because my own experience, my own way, imagination of the world, my own understanding of the world actually go into thinking of that piece of work.
mm,
Right. But the story, for example, in Titanic, it's a story about a boy and a girl. Boy comes from a poor family, girl comes from aristocracy, and they fall in love, and the boy finally dies in a ship uh, when the ship sinks, when Titanic sinks. So still the story remains the same ultimately, even today.
yeah,
But the way I think or feel about it has significantly changed. And that's true for, I think, every piece of work that you will come across, whether it's literature or any other art form
mm,
that you will come across at any given stage of your life. It is always going to shift. So that's what I think about uh, about the question of fallacy that you spoke about. So my
mm,
answer isn't that I'm either on this side or that side. I do think that it's a conglomeration of both.
yeah. So,
I also think it's an interpretation that often communities give to a certain artwork. So what
mm,
together we make sense of something. So of course, one is this individual positioning of how where I am placed in a certain time in my life, but also the fact that um, some of these art forms are consumed together with family, or
yes,
in cultural contexts, or in communities that I belong, right? And those need not be any given community to you. So it's not a community which is by religion or by gender or by anything. It's more of a community that you give yourself to, or you feel you belong to. For example, IITB students of 1984 or something, the class of 1984. They might be a community by itself, and they experience certain theater performances that might have happened at that point of time, and they share those experiences as a community, which you might experience in your own world today when you are a student here within your own little community that you have created. But having said that, there are also experiences that we feel together, and the artworks which come out of it, whether they come out of protests. For example, when the CNRC protests were happening, at that time, a lot of poetry was coming out. So if you
Yes.
feel a community in that sense, then you associate with it in a certain way. So these are individual elements, but these are also elements that we imbibe from the communities we live in. And simultaneously, when somebody else who comes from outside and is not part of that community would completely read that artwork differently
Hmm.
because of the kind of individual and community experiences that person might have had. Yeah.
So, how do we consider any art to be high art? Like high in terms of the technicalities it goes through, or something like that? Because let's say I create a piece of artwork right now,
Mm.
and
Mm.
the community right now doesn't accept it. Like they discard it, but maybe 200, 300 years later, it is considered to be a very high art, a very popular art.
Mm.
So maybe the community has become stupid enough over 200 years that it considers it to be a high art, or maybe I have created a very fantastic piece which was ahead of its time. So uh, in this way, any art can become high art or popular art in some time, or maybe resonate with any community.
So these categories of high art and popular art, these are categories which I think have become redundant over time. Okay, because one factor which is very important to understand is that it is the community that I was talking about, a society, which kind of claims that something is high art, and then the practices around it happen. We have to
Mm,
understand that art is also part of an industry
mm,
and part of a certain kind of consumption by people, right?
yeah.
So it has makers who can be deemed as workers or creators, so who earn out of the work that they do, and then there are consumers, so people who will buy that art, who will consume that art. So this consumption network, this creation consumption network, or this industry is at the heart of what then can be called high art, and what can be called popular art. Usually, in during the early 20th century or late 19th century, this is when the division really comes to surface. You see that this division also happens because of the nature of this consumption. So anything that was mass consumed was never really high art.
Mm,
Anything that was consumed rather by the elite, who thought they were connoisseurs of a certain kind of form, would then call it or give it the status of a certain kind of art form, right? And this also happened during the colonial period. For example, the kind of so realism, for example, during the colonial period, it got introduced in painting. Until then, Indian painting was never really following methods of perspective, in the sense realistic perspective that is often used in the West.
mm,
So at that point of time, so the East India Company actually opened several art schools in India in order to train painters here, so that at that point of time also there was no photography. And
mm,
so, in order to document what was around then, they had several painters trained in methods of the West of realism, and then they had several paintings of as documentations made. So, if they were in a certain area, then they had to document it. So they had to create information about it. But they had no photography, was not popular or was not there. So they used to use painters to create these artworks, which also later on came to be known as company painting. But that never got the status of high art. It's only much later, post independence, that we started studying company painting, or even the kind of paintings you will see associated to different kind of tribes. So they will be often called folk paintings, right?
Yeah.
So there is a problem in how we categorize different kinds of paintings or different kind of artworks, and we need to understand that these depend a lot on the power relationships, social power relationships,
Hmm.
uh, and how within this industry of consumption, within this network of creators and consumers, how the consumers are placed. There's, I think, a very interesting, I'm forgetting the name of the documentary. There's a very interesting documentary on this, on the worth, how the worth of a certain painting is decided, in on
Hmm.
Netflix, I think. I'm forgetting right now, I can't quite remember the name
Okay.
of the documentary, but in case I do, then I'll let you know. Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, like was this thing about everyday aesthetics?
Which thing about everything, everyday aesthetics?
I don't know. We were just searching about it and we didn't understand it.
Okay.
Like uh, aesthetics about everyday objects,
Mm-hmm.
everyday happenings, or like what? And why is it like necessary?
Okay. Do you want me to speak about that, or
Yeah, like if you could elaborate a bit.
okay? So aesthetics in everyday life, in the way we perceive art on an everyday basis, and why it's necessary for us is, see, like I told you in the beginning, that people who study the arts are people essentially studying how human soul behaves. And you would see today, especially post pandemic, we are talking about depression and several other things that
Yeah.
relate to different kind of mental health related problems that are kind of coming about now. The thing is that human existence has several different manifestations. Some of it is material manifestations, which often go in the name of development. You create lots of buildings and bridges and industries, and so there's a material aspect to it. But there is also the socio-political aspect to it, I also. But at the same time, there is the aspect of how we as human beings respond to things around us, objects around us, and our behavior with those objects,
Hmm.
which need to be studied within the realm of aesthetics. And often, I think nowadays they are also being studied within the realm of neurobiology, and who are trying to understand how that affects our brain.
Okay.
So, for example, there are different kind of art therapies that have come into existence: dance therapy, art therapy, movement therapy,
Yeah.
music therapy, all these different kinds of therapies. So there is this, and there is also the fact that art enables us to move beyond what has existed always. So
Hmm.
there is again
Hmm.
the philosopher I was telling you about, Jacques Rancière. So he has an argument, which I think several other philosophers and many others have spoken about, which is that art has this power of enabling transformation, which
Hmm.
means that when you are, let's say, in a room watching a performance, you always, by the end of the performance, go out of that room with something changed in you, something that affects you, that might not manifest itself uh, fully then and there, but it does manifest in some form.
Hmm.
And um, uh, and therefore you will often see that several censorship laws come into existence in order to kind of ban arts or restrict arts so that those transformations do not happen, to restrict that those kind of transformations. What if in a space, so it enables us to see beyond or think beyond our realm of cognition. And so one is that, and the other very simple example that I can give you from everyday life, and I think I will take this example. So so I already spoke to you about two dimensions of it. One is therapy and what it does to our minds, and the
Yes.
other is in transformation, which can be called to belong in the realm of politics. Okay,
Hmm. Hmm.
because politics is always seen to be something that exists between two forces, which often then if there are two different forces or two human beings in one space, the kind of tension and the kind of different energies that are come out of it can often, I mean, simply put, can be understood as politics. So so there are these two, but at the same time, when we think about every day, and if you think about your own experience during the lockdown, so what was that thing that enabled you to feel fine? Because many of us had extremely difficult times dealing with the fact that you were at home all the time, and
Yeah.
sometimes, people around you were sick or they were dying, or there were ambulance sirens all the time around you, or there were suddenly roads which were empty, then you were not able to meet the people you love, and all these things that were happening. The things of joy still remain those little elements that exist in our life. It can be a small mug or something. I have this thing in my office,
Yeah.
which is basically to keep a spoon. It's, I think, called a tea. I don't quite remember the name. So
Hmm.
basically, to keep a spoon on it, right? And this is hand painted, you know
Yeah.
so little things are like these. When you have such small objects here and there, it feels like they give you a sense of joy, they give you a sense of fulfillment in some sense, where everything
Hmm.
is not defined by their utility alone,
Hmm.
right? So and I feel it is important to understand that not all objects are only defined by their utility. And if that would have been the case, then I think we would have become no less than robots. I mean, the the fact that, uh, the experiential elements, the sensory elements around us keep us giving so much joy, or helps us to live or understand or perceive our reality in different ways, is very important. And in that sense, in everyday life, art or aesthetics has a huge role to play. In fact, when Rancière says before late 18th century there was no art as such, what has happened is, what he means also is that it is only after late 18th century that you start thinking about art, which is part of that market of the art,
Hmm.
which can be sold and bought outside.
Yes.
Art earlier was something that we did at home. During Diwali, you would have people making rangoli uh, at home. Then you would have people during different kind of religious. I think you were mentioning about spirituality and religion and the relationship to art at some point,
Yeah.
and I think earlier what was happening was that the relationship of art was to everyday life in this sense, that
Hmm.
whether it was a religious festivity or whether it was a wedding or whether it was everyday life, you had you had an expression with materials around you which did not only have a utilitarian purpose. If you go to Kutch, for example, you will see these houses, white houses with these mirror works done. It's called Lippan ka kaam. Okay,
Okay.
so these mirror works, and they are extremely beautiful. Now, what's the purpose of this, and why do we need a purpose? Is, I think, a bigger question than to look for purpose everywhere. I feel that in our world, in this world of late capitalism, where a lot of things are driven by the market, we have started to see monetary value or
Hmm.
profit in everything, and therefore we have stopped realizing the fact that certain things are not really done because there is essentially a utilitarian fact behind it,
Yeah.
that that uh, that those mirrors are actually placed in these beautiful designs in the villages in many parts of Kutch. It does not mean that they have any utilitarian purpose to solve.
Hmm.
Yeah. Also, ma'am, like you mentioned some aspects. One of them is spirituality as well, right? Human aspect. So I wanted to know that is there any relationship between religion, art, and spirituality? Like we can see some instances like we have religious chants, we have religious photographs, we have religious arts. So what's the relation between spirituality and art?
Yeah, that's a interesting question, and this has also been dealt with one when one spoke about aesthetics. One thought about aesthetics, for example, Kant thinks about it.
Hmm.
Hegel, a philosopher who came after him, also thinks about it. The question of spirit, and but I will not go into those aspects, but I'll try to put it very simply. The thing is that. Uh, like I said in the very beginning, that what we study the soul, right? And spirituality and its relationships to the soul is something that we is well established. We all know about it. Um, so uh, it in fact, in Indian aesthetics, for example, um, often it has been understood, art has been understood as something which enables contact with God. Okay, so for example, in this book called Dhvani Aloka, which is by this theorist called Anandavardhana, he goes on to talk about the Shanta Rasa. Okay.
Hmm.
Now, the
Hmm.
Shanta Rasa is something that is also spoken about in Natyashastra, which is ascribed to Bharata
Bharata.
Muni. Yeah. But what Ananda Bardhana does is he talks about how, so in Natyashastra, Shantarasa is not really seen as something which is, it's not discussed in very much detail. It is one of the nine rasas that exist. It is the final rasa. So it says that there are eight rasas which exist, and the final rasa being the Shantarasa, which happens after you have seen, which after you have experienced a performance, as it were. Okay, but in Anandavardhana, what it happens is he relates it to the ideation of the divine, that it is through the Shanta Rasa that we connect directly to God. And this sort of an ideation also has happened in bhakti movements in India, for example,
Hmm. Hmm.
where bhakti poets, through their songs, their poetries, have directly felt that they connect to God. So, this association of the arts and the practice of arts that can connect you to God has always been there. Uh, and yeah, I think I did I answer you properly. Do you?
Yeah, ma'am. Yeah.
So that is often seen as the relationship between art and, now the question may arise that what if what about those who do not really believe in God? What about
Hmm.
those who, for whom, spirituality does not mean that it is any sort of connection to God as such? Now, in Marxist traditions, for example, this transformation has been directly associated to the idea of emancipation.
Hmm.
Emancipation from existing oppressive regimes that you might live in, right? So art enables us to understand our own realities, think about the utopia that uh, is lies ahead of us, for which we are fighting within Marxist understanding. And then the emancipatory factor about the arts is that it enables you to go beyond what um, exists around you, your reality that you want
Hmm.
to fight, that you want to come out of. So
Hmm.
in that sense also, it if you want to think about the spiritual in that sense, then one could also think about the spiritual in that sense.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So it's always about like something beyond oneself. Maybe
Yeah,
fighting a oppressive regime or maybe connecting with the divine. It's basically
exactly.
the same.
Exactly, which is why often oppressive regimes or state powers find art a dangerous element,
Hmm.
because they think that there is a power of going beyond, or
Yes.
transformation, or moving, being the it allows for possibilities of thinking beyond what exists around you. And therefore, not only governments but also earlier the church would not allow any kind of theater to happen. So theater was something which was banned by the church for a very, very long time.
Hmm.
Artistic practices, everything had to be then made only for the divine. It could not
Hmm.
exist by itself. In fact, Plato, for example, was so you know of
Yeah.
Plato, right? The Greek
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
philosopher. So he said that the poet had to be banished from the city because the poet is absolutely useless, in the
Yeah.
sense
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
where so he would actually, Aristotle writes, who was a student of Plato, he talks about it from and in his writings. And Plato basically thinks about an object, and let's say he gives, I think, the example of a table, and he says that the table is basically there's an ideal, there's a divine idea of the table, which of
Hmm.
course God has, and then carpenters basically
Copy
created
that.
the table, copied that. So it's not the original, it's a
Yeah.
copy, it's a
Hmm.
representation of sorts. And the
Hmm.
artist is makes a copy of the copy. So if
Copy.
I'm
Yeah.
painting a table, I am far more removed from the original idea. So in fact, Plato's ideation of the artwork is absolutely the opposite of what I said a little while back. But
Yeah.
Plato actually banished the artist from the city because he thought that such a useless person who is so removed from the idea is absolutely not necessary for the state.
Hmm.
Whereas you would see that the state is also wary of such people, because they then come up
Hmm.
with transformative possibilities of art around us. So
Yes. In many cases, it's also like the divine is speaking through themselves. Like they are just a channel, and the art is expressing itself. So the idea of Plato that uh, you are just making a copy of something that already exists, uh, there is this anti argument that uh, you are just a channel and the divine is making you do that. So it's the original work itself.
the original work is something that you cannot create. So that was the, as in,
Hmm.
like, the artist is far removed from the original work in some sense.
Hmm.
That and for because otherwise the table has a purpose in this world,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and that image of the table has no purpose in the world, and
Hmm.
in fact it's nuisance that it would be part of the city,
Hmm.
of the polis. So that's what he went on to speak about.
Okay.
He speaks about the poet also like that.
Yeah.
So he talks
Yeah.
about how the poet is also, so what he says, that what is the difference between, let's say, a politician and a poet. Now in case of a politician, the politician will say things which he will mean, A poet will say things which might make you feel like that poet is meaning everything, but the
Yeah.
poet is actually through rhetoric
Hmm.
making you feel. So what is the skill of the poet? The poet actually makes you feel things without having those real consequences, like in case of a politician. You cannot charge the poet that you said that we will have the revolution day will come, but it never came. So what
Hmm.
happened? You can't say that to the poet, but you
Yeah.
can ask that to a
Yeah.
politician, that
Politician.
he said that revolution will come, अच्छे दिन आएंगे, but अच्छे दिन कभी नहीं आए. So what went wrong? You can ask that to our prime minister, but you can't really ask that to Amir Aziz, who's writing a lot of poetry these days.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we have discussed a lot about arts and aesthetics. Let's shift our focus to now to something that we have heard that you are far more interested in, and you have a keen enthusiasm in that, and that is theater, I guess, right, ma'am?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll start with a basic question. Like, theater is an artistically rich form. It is known for its spontaneity and the
Hmm.
collaborative characteristics. So I just want to know that how did it start? Like, how did theater start? How was it originated? Like, I bet that might be an interesting story to hear.
When you told me about this session that we'll have together, I took a quote out, which I thought I will read out to you because it might
Yeah.
be very interesting and actually quite funny in the way how theater came into being, right?
Okay. Okay,
So
ma'am.
I think I'll just read it out to you because
Yeah,
I
sure.
feel if there is any origin theory, I think there is no origin theory more interesting than this one.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay, so this is from the Natyashastra.
Hmm.
It is which we just spoke about a while back, and this is in the context when in the Natya Shastra, what happens is, for those who might not know about the text, it is a text which goes on to talk about how drama should be created, what are the components it should have. It's very, very extensive. It's extensively written, and it's one of the most ancient texts that exist on dramatic theory as such. So in that, Bharata, who apparently wrote the text, we don't know if he did, but it might be a collection of different authors writing the text. But he goes on to talk about something called vritti. Okay,
Hmm.
so vrittis are essentially actions, and I will talk about it in a bit. Actions which are absolutely necessary for the creation of uh, theater. Okay,
Hmm.
so I'll just quote from him. He says, I shall now describe how the vrittis came into existence. And we know that drama comes from the base, the root word dram, which means to act,
Hmm.
action of some kind, right?
Yeah.
And theater comes from the word theatron, which is a space.
Yeah.
So essentially, we can then put them together and say that theater is action in space,
Hmm.
right? And
Hmm.
there is, of course, later authors on theater like Peter Brook who have called, who have gone on to say that if there is in any given space, if a man walks by and another watches, then that's theater. Okay,
Hmm.
so it has been put that simplistically. So but I will talk about it through Bharata, and the passage goes like this. I shall now describe how the vrittis came into existence and how they were in different ways applied to plays. So vrittis, like I said, are like actions. Huh? Once divine Vishnu, by his Maya, withdrew all the worlds and turned them into an ocean and lay down on a snake bed. There, the two asuras, Madhu and Kaitava, intoxicated with their strength and itching for a battle, began to threaten Vishnu.
Hmm.
Patting their arms, that is challenging him, the two began to fight with the imperishable Lord, which means Vishnu, the
Vishnu.
creator of all beings, using their knees and fists. They, the two parties, as in Kaitava and Madhu, attacked each other with harsh and various words of abuse, and even the oceans shook. Okay,
Hmm.
so all the worlds, remember Vishnu got all the worlds, mixed them together to
Yeah,
create this
yeah.
Yeah.
ocean, right? So the oceans shook with their rushing at each other. God Brahma, listening to the various words of abuse, shouted at each other, felt slightly perturbed, and said, what is this exchange of abuses? Abuses and counter abuses are flowing without an end. Is this the Bharati Vritti? That is the way words are used. So he said the
Hmm.
abuse that was being used, he says, is this Bharati Vritti. Kill
Hmm.
the two demons. Listen to Brahma, Vishnu said. And listening to Brahma, Vishnu said, I have invented this Bharati to serve my purpose. It will be the Bharati style of a speaker, since words, that is language, or Bharati, so language is also can be translated as Bharati, predominate. Now I shall kill them. So saying, Vishnu began to fight with pure and perfect gestures, and Angaharas is a movement of a certain kind,
Hmm.
those two demons who were experts in fighting. During the fight, the steps of Vishnu were placed in various holes here and there, and they became a heavy burden, as in Bhara,
Hmm.
Ha ha ha.
Bhara, to the earth. And the Bharati style came into existence because of this, that Bharata. So speech came into existence because of that weight.
Ha ha.
And
Hmm.
the bow of Vishnu, called Sanga, as it was turned in aiming this way and that, was brilliant and flashing in quick turns, and it's steadily increasing sattva strength, created the Satvati style. Okay, so Satvati style is the strength that is there, the energy that is there in the performance. So in the entire thing that was happening, and so this is the string that you use in at least the using the bow in this case, the knot in which Vishnu tied his hair. So he took his hair, kesha, and his
Hmm.
various graceful angaharas, the beauty with which he was turning his hair, brought into existence the Kaishiki style. So all the aesthetic elements that were there to
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah,
decorate.
yeah.
So he turned his hair in a certain way before he, threw his bow, because he wanted to take care of his hair. He had long hair, of course. And then during the course of the fight, various charis were used. In the sense, he did different kinds of movements. Charis are these blocks of movements you might have seen in ballets and stuff. So this also
Yeah, yeah,
happens
yeah.
in Indian performance tradition. And charis were used as the fighters were full of samrambha, enragement, and avega, excitement. And these various movements of the fight produced the Aravati Vritti. So it's like forceful movements were created during this fight. Whatever movement Vishnu employed, Brahma made it the origin of a vritti and accepted it by remarks whose meanings accorded to the movement. So he said that, okay, let's say somebody used an abuse, this abuse, Brahma noted down, it's
Yeah,
used for this purpose.
yeah,
This
yeah.
Hmm.
movement is used for this purpose. So Brahma
Yeah.
went on noting all the movements as
Okay.
Vishnu was going through. When Madhu and Kaitava were killed by Vishnu, Brahma said to that enemy destroyer, O Vishnu, you have destroyed the demons by Angaharas, which were unusually straightforward, expressive, and graceful. Therefore, the style of wielding weapons of all kinds shall be known throughout the world as Nyaya, that you gave Nyaya. So,
Hmm.
law was also created like this.
Hmm.
They are called Nyayas because the Angaharas employed in the fight are based on and arise out of Nyaya, wielding, explained in an earlier chapter, from the root, need to carry, etc. I don't need to go into that. The four
Hmm.
vrittis, the name vritti is given because the wielding depends on various emotions and sentiments. The sages utilize that behavior of words and gestures as the abhinaya conceived in the Natya Veda. So the different sages who had read about Brahma's notations of this fight
Hmm.
actually then employed them to create abhinaya, which is acting.
Hmm.
Okay, and therefore the Natya Veda was written. So you can see what is happening in this is there is a mythological story which is
Yes.
about two demons fighting
Huh.
Yeah.
and Vishnu fighting them. and killing them, Brahma noting all of that, and somebody, else reading Brahma's text and then recreating all of that, which is called abhinaya or acting. And that's how theater apparently came into existence, at least in the Indian perspective. Whether
Okay.
Vishnu existed, whether Brahma saw all these notations were made or not, is a different story altogether. One cannot really make a historical probe, I believe, on this, or maybe they can. But even in Western theater, the origins of theater is that mythological, in the
Hmm.
sense that it is very difficult to find the root of this art form, that where it
Hmm.
came from. Often it's said that it is from comedy in the West, but it's not known. There is no full proof as to that was the case.
Hmm.
Okay.
Mm.
So it's very interesting the way storytelling happens
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
over here.
yeah.
So yeah, like coming to the next, like moving forward from this, now let's say the theater has originated and it has been like people are expressing in that form for a very long time. Then at what point did it serve as a cultural change, or let's say social or political change? Like when did it turn to that from entertainment? Like it surely must have been for entertainment purposes, right? Like rasas.
Act- it's not very clear if it was for entertainment or not. So in, because we are talking about the Natyashastra,
Hmm.
although we don't have to remember all the time that Natyashastra, I mean, at this point of time, the written word or even wisdom is something which is only accessible by the upper caste. It is
Hmm.
not accessible by the lower caste at all. And Natya Shastra, which is also known as the fifth Veda, is the only Veda which is accessible to the lower castes. And interestingly, in India, traditionally performance communities have been also caste communities,
Hmm.
and different various castes have been associated to the kind of form that they have performed traditionally,
Hmm. Hmm.
and some of them unfortunately are used as abuses today, within the upper caste I mean, the kind of casteist atmosphere we often live in. So those
Yeah.
are often used as abuses, but we do not realize that the relationship they have to performing arts and also to caste abuse itself.
Hmm.
Having said that, the Natya Shastra in the very first chapter talks about how in the world there was a lot of fight. So there are three worlds, right? In according to Hindu conception
Yeah.
of the world. So there are three
Yeah.
worlds, and how the gods and the asuras were always fighting with each other,
Yeah.
right? And so therefore Vishnu was like, okay, these guys are fighting with each other all the time, Bharata, you are so Bharata said that, so Vishnu told me, and Brahma told me essentially that, why don't you make a play, make something, a performance, which then will make the asuras and the gods understand that there's no point fighting and they can live peacefully with each other. So
Hmm.
it seems from this mythological narrative that exists that the purpose of art was not only for entertainment, because here was a situation where you wanted to teach a group of
Yeah.
demons, gods, whatever you call them, that you need not fight,
Hmm.
you can live peacefully. So in the very beginning of the arts, we see that the arts was not necessarily for entertainment. There were other purposes. It could be used also for education, it could be used for realization of how life
Hmm.
around you is like.
Hmm.
So but that probably changed at some point, we don't know, but we know this for sure that what we call art today, many of these elements were directly related to ritualistic practices in
Hmm.
temples, right?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And they were not art as we know today. So they did not either have a role to play as entertainment or have a role to play as tool of political transformation, but as a, a spiritual tool for a ritualistic practice to be completed.
Hmm. Hmm.
Mhm.
You know, so a completion of a ritualistic practice required that dance to happen,
Yeah, yeah,
required that artwork to be made,
yeah.
Yes.
required that object of art to be made.
Hmm.
So that was very, very important. But having said that, in the modern period, really one of the artistic traditions that set off this aspect of political art or art which has a function in politics is the Marxist tradition,
Hmm.
which talks about the role of art thinking about um, in thinking about, of course, like I said, emancipation, but also disseminating knowledge, mobilizing people. So
Hmm.
these
Hmm.
are things that were later used by Marxist traditions in art forms. That happens very late in the modern period. But if you think about art from its ancient origin, one
Hmm.
cannot say that art was only meant for entertainment.
Hmm. So I remember that in the class that we did, you taught us about Uburoi and how it mocks the authoritarian uh, administrations, how it
Yes.
mocks the fascist regimes. So how it can be even Trump can be considered to be Uburoi. So like that, are there any plays which like completely changed the maybe political or social situation of a region or a country? Like there are any plays which you can tell us about?
Immediately, I can think of this play by Haisam Kanhailal called Draupadi.
Hmm.
It's a. I have seen the play when I was a student, maybe your age at that point of time, and the play is about the Indian Army and the very different. How the Indian Army in Manipur often exploits the power they have,
Hmm.
especially through sexual harassment and rape.
Yes.
So in Manipur, when Kanhailal made Draupadi, the play reflected that. And in the play, what happens is, so there is this woman who is basically raped by the Indian Army, and
Hmm.
she is then charged of a crime and then put in jail, and then she's taken, so even within the jail she's raped several times,
Hmm.
and then when she's taken to court and she has to give evidence, she refuses to wear clothes,
Hmm.
right? But she's beaten up and she's forced to wear clothes. And then in the play, I still, every time I think about the sequence, I kind of get goosebumps. And this is also the only instance, not the only instance, later on I did see such use of nudity on stage, but in an Indian play, I saw nudity for the first time was in this play, where Savitri Devi, who's a fantastic actress,
Hmm.
and actually has been is Kanalal's partner, and she at that point of time was in her 60s, I think. And then
Hmm.
there's one sequence where in the court she's asked, and repeatedly everybody is accusing of her of different things she has done, and then there is this one sequence where as a protest she just removes her clothes, and it's not even, it's there for a few seconds, but the kind of impact it had in terms of what she was unable to speak but through her body she could say was immense. And you
Hmm.
saw that later on, in Manipur, there were protests by women who went in front of the government's gate, as in, like, I think the state government offices gate, and then they protested without clothes. And so many years later, Kanhailal said that, it's interesting that you made this play, and after a few years, after only a couple of years, we see that these women are doing the same kind of protest which you had written about. So Kanhailal goes
Hmm.
on to say that, I know my people.
Hmm.
So,
Mhm.
so I think that play had a significant role to. play in thinking about the politics of that region.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to the next question that I have, that you have yourself worked on plays, ma'am, right? You have worked on some plays, right? You
Yeah.
have either
Yeah.
ideated
Yeah.
or just so I just want to know what's
Directed.
the journey from scratch to stage, like how is a play made?
So it varies from people to people, I would say, and depending uh, on the different kind of practices that you are used to, or because of the political association to many of these theories as to why a performance should be made in a certain way, it may vary from people to people.
Hmm.
But with me, the way I make plays, or the way I think it works best for me, is when I work only on a concept or an idea or a problem or anything that has affected me personally. So for me,
Hmm.
it's very, very important that it needs to affect me personally.
Hmm.
And then I start reading up on it, I start researching on it,
Okay.
and then I go on the floor. In the sense, I go on in the rehearsal room with my actors. Usually, I repeat my actors a lot. In the sense, if I worked with them in the past, then I can keep working with them again. That
Okay.
helps. But sometimes also there's casting done based on a few ideas
Hmm.
which I know I will implement. For example, the kind of theater I do is often also known as physical theater, okay,
Yeah.
which requires a lot of body movement, etc. So
Mm-hmm.
for me, when I work with an actor, it's important that the actor is comfortable doing movement on stage. So so then after this basic casting has happened, we discuss through the idea, and then all of us together do research, our own research, get material, and then we start improvising on stage. So we create what I borrowing from this theater director called Eugenio Barba called making of scores. So
Hmm.
scores are like in music, you have scores, you have like different notations
Yeah,
coming
yeah.
in together to make a score.
Yes.
Similarly,
Yes.
in this case, different movement and actions, not movement so much, but actions, which include speech, movement, everything. You create scores. So I create scores, and then finally I put them together and edit them together into one narrative. So the
Okay.
narrative is essentially made in the end, unlike the
Oh,
practice of several other
yeah, yeah,
theater makers who first write. So you have a script
yeah,
writer writing the play, and then there is a director and the script writer sitting with each other
Yeah.
discussing it, and then actors are called in depending on the characters that have been made, and then the play is staged. That's the, I think, one of the methods where you
yeah.
block your script. But I work the other way around, where the actors are part of the process from the very beginning, and
Hmm.
characters are not do not come from outside. So
Mm-hmm.
characters are not given to the actors to perform, but the actors make characters, which are then become part of the play.
Hmm.
So it's that's how I work. So sometimes I'm infamous with some actors because I give them the script on the morning before the show. This is your script. And it keeps changing even during the performance, like multiple times. Like as we keep doing performances, we keep making changes in the play, so that happens.
Yeah, that's
Yeah. This is also
So,
known as devising. Sometimes people call it devising as well.
hmm.
okay. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. So I was asking, like, for you, when you're making a play, is it like holding a mirror up to the society, or is it like you want to portray a particular idea just because it is that concept that you want to reach to the audiences?
I think it's the concept that I want to reach to the audiences. But having said that, I cannot escape the fact that there are several things that exist in the society which affect me, and then it goes to the audience.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
So I feel each one of us have the right to create what we feel deeply about with whatever material that we have around you. Expertise in using material is something which can be your camera, your microphone, your wallpaper, your script, may come with time. And sometimes you also train yourself to all those methods, but
Yeah.
each one of us have our right to express ourselves for the sake of our emotional well-being, or our
Yeah.
or our well-being in general. And in that sense, I very much believe in this saying that every man is an artist. But having said that, insofar as I live in a society, those concerns matter to me, and then they reflect in my work. If I ignore the fact that I live in a society which has certain issues as a person, then that will reflect in my work as well.
Yeah.
That I am completely unaware of how my society, you know, the society around me is. And therefore, my artwork tends to be like that.
And how much does the economic aspect like affect or hinder your uh, process of making a play?
That's a very good question, because I think sometimes we do not realize that in the modern age, the art making process has, like I was pressing on, is that it has become an industry, and we cannot not think about it. So when we think about commercial films or commercial plays, they are not really made with the fact that a director wants to reflect his or
Yeah.
her understanding about the world. The goal for those plays are very different, and
Mm-hmm.
that's the commerce of it. And I understand it, especially when the work itself is your sole purpose of livelihood. And if in Indian aesthetics, there's this word that which is often used in artistic creation, which is called sadhana. Sadhana means when you cultivate a certain kind of skill in you. That can be artwork, but that can be anything also used in artistic practices. Now, unfortunately, because of the way funding has shifted over time. So earlier, it would be communities funding an artwork themselves, or temples funding it. Then there was, kings and zamindars funding it. And now, and when democracy in India, for example, post independence, it was the state which took on that role. But increasingly, with the state, with liberalization and the state giving up on its own interest in spending any money on the arts, this has been imposed in some sense to the corporates as CSR, corporate social responsibility. But ultimately, I feel that if we feel as a society that art is a thing that requires to be cultivated, so sadhana of an artistic practice has to happen, then we also have to put money for it.
Yeah.
I mean, it hinders. I mean, many of us who actually want to do artistic practice full time are unable to do it. We take up a second job, sometimes teaching, sometimes doing workshops, sometimes other stuff, only because we do not have a way of earning through the artwork that we make. It does not provide for us or our families, and therefore we have to find other sources. But that leads to a society's inability to cultivate a certain art form.
Hmm.
So we become devoid of the practice of art, or we become devoid of the sadhana that is required for an artistic practice. And therefore, I mean, it does impact my work directly, but at the same time, I think it's important that we realize it, that the community once again has to understand that artistic practices are absolutely necessary for its own well-being and also for the well-being of each of us as
Hmm.
individuals.
Hmm.
And therefore we put some money, something for artistic practices. Otherwise artworks otherwise we'll only get commercial artworks in the way it's sold.
Hmm.
If we don't take care of artists and the practice of art as such.
Yes. So, coming to the next question, it's kind of a personal question to you. That we know that you studied masters from JNU, arts and aesthetics, right? Masters in
Right.
arts and aesthetics. So, from there, why did you choose theater? Like, why not cinema? Well, I'm sure you would have studied everything in arts and aesthetics. So, what has drawn you towards theater? Like, why not cinema or
Mm,
something else?
that's so there. Part of your question is true. Part of your question is an assumption, I would say,
Okay, okay.
because I am interested in cinema very much.
Hmm.
I do not study it as a theory. Although I did at some point in arts and aesthetics in my master's course, we had to do courses from film studies. So I
Mhm.
studied it, and I also studied from Prague Film School, where I learned digital filmmaking and things like that.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that's also something of my interest, but it isn't something of my interest insofar as the theory of cinema is concerned.
Hmm.
So, as a theoretician or the Wissenschaftlerin of anything, I'm a
Hmm.
theater Wissenschaftlerin. So, a
Hmm.
scientist of theater, but not a film Wissenschaftlerin. So, you might say that. But that also happened because when I joined JNU, I was part of the several student cultural activities that would happen, and in most cases, that would happen in the form of theater. And I got interested in student politics, like many students do in JNU,
Hmm.
and I realized that the importance of performance that was there in politics as such, which then I studied, whether in my MPhil or later in my PhD as well. That what is that impact, which I was speaking about a while back, that there is a political impact of
Hmm.
Hmm.
theater, which I'm not very sure if the other arts have it or how much it has it, but maybe they do. Um, as a study, this interested me, and I stayed with it
Hmm.
for my PhD, and later also that's what I teach. But as an artistic practice, I do not think I limit myself to theater as such.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and in any case, theater is a conglomeration of the different kinds of arts, no? Like
Yeah.
Yeah.
you have music in it, you
Yeah.
have the background that you use. So there is visual arts in it, then there is
Storytelling,
so
writing,
storytelling in it, writing in it, and in cinema you have just one more element, which is the camera
camera.
and
Hmm.
editing. So as part of it. So I think all of them interest me very much, and I hope that someday I'll be able to work with all these mediums together.
Yeah.
But
So yeah,
there was
ma'am. Yeah.
no bias.
So do you plan on being a full-time director someday, like sometime in the future?
That's a very tricky question for me to answer actually. Because I'm
We shall
in a full time I'm
edit
in a
that.
full time job at IIT
We'll cut
as
that.
a teacher. No comments.
Okay.
Understood. Understood. uh, yeah, we are. I mean, we are done with the questions. One
Yeah.
last question that
Hmm.
we just wanted some recommendations from you. Like, first, your top three favorite plays, so that we can suggest it to people, and other some plays that you would like to suggest to some beginner. Yeah, someone who wants to start watching plays, or someone who wants to enter theater.
See, right now most theaters are not running, so I don't know what you may watch at the moment. But there was this
Okay.
play, I think it was also brought to IIT Bombay. It was called मैं हूँ यूसुफ और ये है
Yeah,
मेरा
yeah,
भाई by
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mohit Takalkar. So it was a very beautiful play. I don't know if you've watched it, but it's a very good play. So that's one recommendation for sure.
Okay.
But that's from a play of the current phase you can
Yeah,
watch
yeah,
in
yeah, yeah.
Bombay,
Mm-hmm.
kind of a play. I don't know, although if it's running or not.
Hmm.
If you ask me about plays that I have liked a lot, and some of them might be available in recordings. So the first one that comes to my mind is something called Salt, a play called Salt,
Hmm.
that's
Okay.
created by Odin Theatret and directed by Eugenio Barba, acted
That's
by this
exactly behind
beautiful.
you, right?
Yeah,
Out in the
yeah,
address.
I love their work. So Salt is a play, a fantastic play. It's in Italian though, but
Hmm.
Okay.
I think it will have subtitles. So I saw this play. I remember as a student in Odin in Denmark, and it was in Italian. I did not understand everything they were saying, but the impact that play had on me was unbelievable. So that one play stays with me very much. The other play I just told you about, which is Draupadi,
Yeah.
again a
Hmm.
significant play in making me decide to study theater. Actually, whether to make theater or not, that's a different thing, but to at least to study theater, that why would we, because it's not like nudity is not something we don't watch in cinema or in
Mm-hmm.
painting. It's very common, but when you see it in a performance, like the way it was put in that particular play, in the context it was put, it had an impact which was unbelievable. And also the play, the story itself, and the way it was directed, and the simplicity of the play. Kanalal has this aesthetics which is very simple. Actually, that's interestingly, now that I talk about it, Eugenio Barba also has a very simplistic aesthetics. His set and
Hmm.
everything is very minimal, but yet you get a certain kind of access to the narrative in a way you wouldn't get even if there was a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah.
know, the simplicity has a certain kind of beauty. So that recently a play that has become extremely popular, and it showed actually online, and that's where I saw it, is called The Encounter. It's by this British theatre director called Simon McBurney. He's also an actor, and they use acoustics very interestingly. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he made it for the online space, but it was so during the lockdown period, and when there was strict lockdown, there
Mm-hmm.
were several theaters which were releasing plays online, recordings of plays online. And Simon McBurney had created this play which had a certain kind of oral composition, which felt like you, if you had closed your eyes, it felt like sometimes somebody is talking from here, sometimes
Hmm.
somebody is talking from here, sometimes somebody is talking from there from a distance. So he experimented with that form,
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
and it really felt like, and it was about a jungle and things like that. So it really felt like you went there,
Mm-hmm.
you
Hmm.
were already in that space, and he was talking to you as if things around you. So that was very interesting. Then there's this very good theater maker, I usually like his work very much, called Thomas Ostermeyer. Thomas
Hmm.
Ostermeyer is a German theater director. There's this play called Richard the Third, which I watched in Berlin again when I was a student. It is probably available on YouTube. You could check it out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Again, very interesting work. Does physical theater, quote unquote. I mean, physical theater, whatever that means. But yeah. And then there's also Robert Wilson, who works at Berliner Ensemble in Berlin again, which is where I studied, and which is why probably my examples are mostly from Europe, because I studied there and I watched quite a few plays there. So Robert Wilson's Peter Pan, I think the play is available on Vimeo, the entire play.
Okay.
So you
Hmm.
can watch it there. A beautiful play. I think the recording is not so much fun, but when you see it live, it's fantastic. There's one more play I saw as a student, which which is very significant, I think, especially for its politics and the kind of archival work that went into making of the play. It's called Cotton 56 Polyester 84. It's directed by Sunil Shanbag. This was a play that came into the Meta Theatre Festival when I was a student at JNU. So I watched it that time, and I had a significant impact on theatre and its relationship to society and politics. So that's another recommendation.
Yeah, thanks, ma'am, for that. Also, ma'am, have you tried making any play in the institute, like for anything? Like, have you ever tried working in the institute with students
I
like that?
haven't actually. I haven't. I have done workshops,
Okay, okay,
and there were students from the institute who often worked with me when I make plays outside. So
okay,
they
okay.
did backstage. There was one student who wrote with me, so we co-wrote a play
Oh,
together.
okay,
But I can hardly call them students from IIT. I can rather call them friends from IIT, because when you work with them, they
yeah,
are your friends in a play that you're making. So as such, I've not really made any play with students at
okay,
IIT, although I have done workshops.
okay. Yeah. So yeah, I guess that's it. Like we have,
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
that was long, I think,
yeah.
almost
Yes,
one and a
more
half
than an hour.
hour.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah, thanks a lot for that, ma'am. Like it was
sure.
really enlightening. We were watching like a small
Yeah.
kids. मतलब बहुत
अरे
ज़्यादा ही
no.
बहुत ज़्यादा information. मतलब this is really interesting field. Like we had no idea about it. We started researching about it and we were
Yeah. Yeah.
like astonished. This is really interesting.
But yeah, nice talking to both of you. Very
Thanks.
interesting questions, deep questions.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
ठीक है प्रशिक बेटा, इसका मतलब समझे, हम सब गलत है.
हाँ हाँ, चलो यार कोई सिनेमा देख के आते हैं.
चल.